So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our very first episode of The Science of Us. I'm very fortunate to be joined here by none other than Katharina Kuehn, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at the Winning Group, also one of APAC's leading neuroscientists. Now, we're going to be talking a little bit about today, really to try and uncover our deepest emotional drivers, a lot about how we behave in general. So it forms the foundation of a lot of what we'd like to talk about in future episodes as well. So without further ado, welcome, Kat.
Hi, Tim.
Now, for those of people out there who don't know you, could we start with a little bit of background on yourself?
Well, going all the way back, growing up in Germany with two psychotherapist parents, I guess I always
had
very good education. Got used to asking the why behind behavior, I guess, very early on. And that led me to later on study, all sorts of sciences to do with explaining human behavior, starting with the sociology perspective. As we are social beings, how do we interact in group and we don't act in a vacuum? So understanding human behavior from that perspective, then marketing. And then in my studies came across Dr. Heusel, one of the German neuroscience pioneers at the time, working with neuroscience for business. And I was fortunate enough to start working and training with him directly in his team. And so that led me later on to the career I've pursued.
Awesome. And going back a step, I have to ask, what were the dinner conversations like, the dinner table conversations like with your parents?
Interesting, I would say, non-standard. Sometimes as a child, I wish that my parents could just be normal and punish me in normal ways, like normal parents do. I remember one time when I was 13, we're at a party from my parents' friends, and we were in the basement, a group of wild teenagers, and we got a little drunk, and my mum found me and drove me home, and we had an incident on the drive home. And then in the morning, of course, it's not, you already feel bad enough, and but that wasn't enough for them. Rather than giving me no permission to watch TV or something like that, we had to sit down and analyze why I did it, whether I would intend to do it again, what the experience was like, and so on. And I think that cured me for years.
Yeah, that's an education for you.
Yes.
Something you think modern day parenting should adopt, or?
Well, in hindsight, I have to say, growing up like that, especially as a teenager, it can be quite confronting. But now I'm definitely extremely grateful to my parents for giving me that kind of questioning, curious mind into our behavior, because that's what I love doing now, looking at human behavior, understanding the why behind it. And so, yeah, I thank them today.
Well, on that note, so if we can break down neuroscience a little bit for the everyday person, because not everyone knows what neuroscience is, how it works. Can you give us a little bit of background about what it actually is?
So essentially, of course, neuroscience is the science of understanding how our brain works, including anatomy, biology, chemistry, and how that influences our cognitive and emotional processes, to ultimately explain, who we are and why we behave the way we do.
Excellent. And is there a specific example? I mean, how is neuroscience actually used today in all of the different disciplines? Is there a specific example you can give as to what that actually looks like?
So I can just talk about using neuroscience for business, right, which is what we do here, where anywhere where there are brains involved, basically there's a place for neuroscience to inform what's really going on behind the scenes. So whether we use it for understanding our own employees, our teams, our team dynamics, or ourselves or our customers and why they behave the way we do, right through to actually understanding brand positioning, in the sense that brands, of course, are associative constructs in people's minds, and understanding how that comes about and how we can influence those perceptions. Again, there's a place for studying that by looking inside the brain rather than using traditional methods of asking people what they think and why they think, because we now know through neuroscience as well that approach has extreme limitations, since people are largely unaware of what's going on.
And if people are unaware of what's going on, so brands sort of use that where they've tapped into that subconscious level to try and motivate someone to buy something, for instance.
Yeah, to buy something, to buy into an idea, to vote for someone. I think we've had some recent examples where companies and agencies are becoming smarter and smarter at tapping into the science of emotion and cognition and exploiting that basically to activate certain triggers in consumers and in voters to get the desired outcomes, because that's the one thing that has been proven over and over now, is that this approach is far more effective than trying to speak to the rational conscious mind of the consumers. This is not the part of the brain that actually controls decision-making and behavior.
And I think you also gave me an example about, was it wine? Something to do with selling wine? You said that there was an experiment done a little while ago. Can you remind me about that story?
That's a lovely experiment that actually demonstrates how much more powerful neuroscience research is when compared to traditional methods, which is where researchers experimented with music being played on the supermarket shelf and how that would influence buying decisions on the shelf. And what they did is they tried to see whether German wine sold better when playing German music and French wine when playing French music. And that is exactly what happened. So when French music was played, French wine outsold a German wine 3-1 and vice versa. And the interesting part, of course, when we're asking people at the checkout in the supermarket why they made the decision they made, they're extremely good at coming up with all sorts of reasons, but they never are aware of the real reasons, because in fact none of the respondents was aware of music even being played at the shelf. And I think that is just one very powerful example where we can start to appreciate how much those subliminal environmental cues actually influence our behavior without us being even remotely aware of that.
And a lot of this hasn't really changed. Am I right in sort of over the hundreds and hundreds of years of human development and evolution, a lot of this stuff in the way our brain works relatively remains the same?
Absolutely. And I think that's a refreshing antidote to the story of people have changed and generations have changed and the world is moving so fast, but really humans haven't changed that much at all in their general basic design. So the primal emotion systems that guide largely our behavior today are ancient and actually exist in all mammals, and so they're hardwired, they're old systems that guide our behavior, that filter our perceptions, and that is part of the study of neuroscience, behavior, and personality, to really understand what those emotional systems are and how they influence who we are and how we behave.
And so it sounds like, from what you're saying, that we really don't know ourselves that well. What are the main things you think we're missing when it comes to trying to get that understanding of who we are?
Yeah, I think we all do have a sense that we do know ourselves, right? Like, I know who I am and what I like and what I don't like and what my style is and so on. But I think that's exactly what the brain does. It enables a sense of self. But I would say it rather constructs it than that it is an actual thing. And the neurophilosopher Daniel Dennett speaks about the user illusion in that context. And he says that human consciousness is like a government spokesperson that actually is there to announce decisions it hasn't been part of making, and is completely unaware of the true reasons for the decisions as well. And I think that is pretty true for our self-awareness as well. I think we see in our behavioral cues or our preferences the expression of our underlying emotions, while being completely unaware of those primal emotion systems we spoke about that bring about that behavior or that motivation, the drive, and the psychological needs in the first place. And
so neuroscience is obviously a way that we can use, or a technique that we can use to actually better understand ourselves. I mean, how can we actually use it? I know that there are many other personality profiling tools, or whatever you'd like to call them, out there. What's the role of neuroscience in that, in terms of helping us better understand who we are? Yeah, I think we're at the fortunate point now that we actually get to look inside the brain, get to understand how neurochemistry, anatomy, and so on influence who we are and how we decide the way we do. Where in the past we had to rely on, from horoscopes to personality quizzes, Myers-Briggs and the likes, which is not bad, but neuroscience takes it a step further and really says, okay, so who are we at the genetic fundamental level, and then how does cognitive functioning come into that to shape who we are? Of course, it's very complex and there are many influencing factors, but neuroscience opens a completely new window into that understanding about ourselves. And I think, you're totally right that we are constantly trying to figure out who we are. As individuals, I know you've mentioned horoscopes. I've bought into that sort of stuff before. I like to look at how that how it makes me who I am and how I interact with somebody else. But I guess, I mean, that comes down to, if we are searching for this really deep understanding of ourselves, empathy is another thing that comes up a lot today, particularly in the workplace. How well do we understand other people around us? How can we put ourselves in their shoes? So I guess, now in today's age, and especially as I said in the workplace, it needs to be something that is developed. But what are your kind of thoughts on that? How can we actually develop more empathy? And I know you have a particular passion for this.
Yeah, that passion came about by really looking around us in the world today, and I think we are in the middle of an empathy crisis, and we see that in politics, we see that in our normal social environment, that we live in a time and place of increased polarization where, we look for sameness, not otherness, and everything that's other than ourselves, we tend to tune out on. And I think we see that in the workplace in the same way. And the result of that, and I mean, it's not actually, as humans, we do have a great capacity for empathy, and we are naturally empathetic beings. That's why we can be so great at collaboration and nurturing and so on. And that's gotten us very far as a species. But the time and place we live in of, technology and increased polarization, and we're becoming more busy and less patient, doesn't really help to take a step back and listen to each other and take a moment to reflect on ourselves and other people. And so I think that has given rise to that empathy crisis we're seeing in the world today. And so I think the way to address this is to take a step back and give people a tool to stop and get a deeper insight into themselves, and by doing that get a deeper insight into other people as well, because once we understand ourselves, we understand that we have unique reality filters we're navigating our environments with, and that not everybody is the same. And once we understand that, we can't really judge that in others, but rather probably appreciate the differences and actually work together to combine those strengths rather than becoming frustrated at otherness, which I think is something we're seeing a lot at the moment.
When I think onto that point, you mentioned politics before, how I guess a lot of people don't necessarily want to recognize what other people believe in. It's just this one train of thought. And I guess in many extents, people have probably abused that a little bit and manipulated people into believing a certain thing a certain way. I don't know if what your thoughts are specifically on things like social media, which may have had more of a negative impact in a lot of cases as opposed to the positive impact they were supposed to create in the first place.
I think the dangerous thing we're seeing in the world today is that, yes, it is emotions that largely rule our decision making, but that by way of the human design, we're unaware of those emotions. But increasingly, there are people who specialize in understanding and tapping into those emotions. And that's exactly what we're seeing now, that those who understand other people better than those people understand themselves basically hold the power to direct decision making. And we're seeing that, multiplied by technology now, because if you have the technology, and talking about social media as you touched on it, you're suddenly scaling that influence, where before it relied on one-on-one communication, but now you can actually scale that mass influence by tapping into emotions.
And is there are you surprised in the sense to see this rise of tribalism across the world off the back of a lot of, I guess, some of these techniques that people are using? Is it tapping into something inherently that exists within all of us, and that's why people like Trump, etc., can actually really make use of that with their fan base? Yeah,
I think we humans we have a desire to belong, we have a desire to connect, we have a desire for trust, and it is easier to trust people who are more like us. So the whole us-them thing is as old as human nature. I don't think there's anything new in that, but the exploitation of that to a certain outcome from very powerful players in this world, I think that's reached a new level. But as you say, it wouldn't be happening if it wasn't tapping into something that we are very much prone to fall into that trap.
Yeah, and I think it's always very easy to, as we've talked about in the past, to gravitate towards people that you feel that connection with and understanding, even though you could get a lot more benefit out of recognizing that, and that one person that may not be the same as you, but you could actually get on very well and complement each other in so many ways. I think Kari Anderson, who's done a lot of studies into that, she gives the example of somebody at a party who's looking awkward and in the corner by themselves, and that's somebody you should actually seek out to talk to, because you never know what you could actually uncover as part of that relationship, as opposed to going and joining the clique group that you're just feeling comfortable with.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and I think I'm going to make that my mission at the next networking thing, because I hate networking for the sake of it. But if you actually have that mission to go to the most awkward looking person in the room, then I think that could be fun. And I think that would exactly do what we need to see more of in the world today now, which is a dialogue across completely different individuals.
So, and I guess on this notion of, trying to be a bit better in ourselves, can neuroscience actually help people become better versions of themselves?
Insofar probably as understanding can influence our behavior, right? So that's why I'm putting a big asterisk, because we know that humans can be very good at understanding everything and then nevertheless acting in stupid ways, right?
Yeah.
Whether that is I want to lose weight, but I'm finding myself eating that cookie, or whether that is I know that driving a fast car is bad for the environment, but I love it right now and I do it anyway.
Yep.
So we're very, very paradoxical, contradictory beings, and just because you understand something doesn't mean we can necessarily change our behavior. But on the other hand, I think on that topic, there is no way around understanding it first. Because of course we could say, let's just manipulate people into behaving better, but then it's always just the best manipulator who wins. And I don't think that's a very inspiring vision for the future of humanity. Yeah. So I think the way forward has to be creating a deeper insight into ourselves by using that amazing new science, neuroscience, and using technology to enable that. And so I'm super excited to be working on a non-for-profit platform at the moment that actually will provide people with a greater insight into themselves, because I do think that is at least one small contribution to better those conditions we've been speaking about.
And if you look more closely, I think we'd love to drill into that probably at a future date. But with the likes of the workplace now, and how you can actually use neuroscience to better understand one another, if we come back to that sort of empathy point we were talking about before, have you got specific examples about how you've been doing that yourself within something like the Winning Group?
Yeah, well, I think that's the great thing in a workplace. You can almost treat it like a small subsection of humanity, right? And in our small business of 1,000 people can actually say, okay, let's use this as a testing ground of how we can use that understanding to actually have better conversations. And that's what we've been doing here for the last 3 years at the Winning Group, that we first step was to actually collect and share with everyone their own personality profiles, including their core emotions that drive them, what motivates them, what they find difficult, what they're actually looking for. And then in a second step, train up everyone in the team to understand not only their own personality, but the personality of those around them. Because of course a business has every personality that there is on the planet. And so seeing the team actually gaining a greater understanding over time, and using that understanding to collaborate more effectively and to solve problems in better and more creative ways has been just wonderful. And more recently, I feel like it's become second language for us, where a manager, for example, called me in the kitchen the other day and said, I've been butting heads with my team member for ages now, until I actually remembered you said, hey, look at their profile. I went back into the system, looked at the profile, actually found that it was the opposite profile of himself, and then read up on how to actually deal with that, how to talk to that person. He was like, wow, that was so eye-opening, because that person has a completely different filter on reality than I have. I realized that in that moment. We used that, and we found an amazing solution for the problem we've been having for months and couldn't solve. And I found that incredibly rewarding and encouraging to keep spreading that knowledge exactly for that purpose, because it's not only in business problem solving. I think it will solve a whole lot of problems if people can become more aware of that. Totally.
I mean, just that pure understanding of what motivates somebody else's, rather than just focusing on what you want as out of an outcome of a conversation or whatever it might be. And I think that we're so traditionally wired to go into a conversation trying to get out of it what we want, as opposed to trying to understand what the other person is wanting out of that same conversation. Yeah. So I think it's fascinating. So with the workplace, obviously in mind as a place to start, maybe if I can sort of change tact a little bit and say, when it comes to then the broader scene in terms of that understanding, but what do you think we're most at risk of when it comes to the human race in general? We've talked a lot about the differences of being able to better understand yourself and understand others. what do you see as the fundamental flaws that we might then therefore have based on what we know now for the future of the human race? It's just a small question, I know.
It's just a very small question to finish off on. Well, I think one of the major risks we have is that being ever more advanced and being ever more intelligent and becoming ever more informed doesn't necessarily make us kinder or wiser. And I think that's a lot of the problems we're seeing now. You know, we have all the technologies on the planet. We can soon fly to the Mars. We have artificial intelligence. We've got neuroscience and so on. But we haven't actually become better at making wise decisions that improve the greater good, right? So we can see that when it comes to climate change. We see that when it comes to politics, like all over the place, we see the same thing. And I'm worried that if we don't solve that, we'll just take the same human condition to Mars and nothing will change. We'll just repeat the same pattern over and over. So I think that is the major challenge for humanity, to grow up in that sense and to, just not repeat the same patterns, but becoming ever more powerful on this planet and meanwhile eradicating other species and so on along the way.
Wow, there you go. I think it's... would you say you're then an optimist or a pessimist when it comes to the future?
I'm an optimist because that's my natural bias. I know about that. But I think you do need to be an optimist as well, because, what are we going to do if we just say we can't do anything about it, we can't change anything, then we might as well die right now. So I choose to remain an optimist as well. But of course, I'm also realistic about knowing what we just spoke about, how much does actually knowledge influence how we truly behave. I think we've got a long way to go there, but I'm very committed to helping at least with that first step of creating a greater understanding and then hopefully getting other smart people involved to say, okay, how do we translate that into behavior?
Well, Kat, thank you so much. I very much enjoyed the conversation, as always. If you'd like to learn more about Kat and her work, you can look her up on LinkedIn, of course. Also head to our website at helix.com, that's with a double E, and you can look at some of the work that she does with us directly there. And we will also put in the show notes some of those links to some of the things that she's talked about in the show and also to her profile. But Kat, for now, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much,
on the
Tim.
Science of Us, and
Appreciate it.
we'll see you on the next one.